Naomi Blackwell stepped into the Elan Noir flagship store with the kind of quiet confidence that turned heads without effort. Her silk blouse, effortlessly tucked into tailored cream trousers, whispered understated luxury. The leather clutch in her hand, one of her own designs, was a limited edition piece, yet no one in the store seemed to recognize it. They only saw her skin. The rich, dark tone that, in places like this, often became a silent invitation for suspicion. Her eye skimmed the displays, absorbing the subtle lighting, the arrangement of handbags, the mannequins draped in the latest collection. She noted every detail, because she had curated it. This was her vision brought to life. But today, she wasn't here for a press tour or a board meeting. She was here as a customer, to see how her brand operated when they didn't know the boss was watching. From across the floor, Todd Walker watched her like a predator studying prey. His lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing as Naomi touched a gold-trimmed clutch. He had seen this before. Women like her, brazen, thinking their beauty would shield their sticky fingers. He leaned towards the young security guard, Jamal Rivers, who stood stiffly near the entrance. "Keep an eye on her," Todd murmured, voice low but sharp. "They're clever. Hide things in their purses, swap tags. You know how it is." Jamal nodded reluctantly, his gaze flickering to Naomi, then down to his shoes. He knew the script. He had seen it too many times. Black customers followed, whispered about, pulled aside while white women walked out with half the store. But he needed this job. So he did what was asked, even as it twisted his stomach. Naomi lifted the clutch, appreciating the craftsmanship. She noticed the security guard's eyes lingering. Her shoulders tensed, but she pushed the feeling down. She was used to this. Even with her success, even with her name printed on the tags inside these bags, the world still saw her as a suspect first. She placed the clutch back carefully and turned toward the shoe section. Todd watched her movement with growing certainty. He had been in retail long enough, he could spot the signs. The way she lingered near high-end items. The calculated nonchalance. He smirked. Amateurs always thought they were slick. He adjusted his tie, preparing himself. Another thief, another lesson to teach. Naomi picked up a pair of heels, feeling their weight. Good quality. But as she admired them, she sensed a presence behind her. She turned slightly. Todd was there, his smile tight and patronizing. He began, voice oozing false politeness. "I'm going to need to check your bag." The words hit like a slap. Naomi froze, clutch tightening around the shoe. Her heart raced, but her face remained composed. "Excuse me?" Her tone was level, but her eyes burned. Around her, other customers turned their heads, whispers beginning to ripple. She saw it, the flicker of glee in Todd's eyes. He enjoyed this. "We've had some incidents," Todd continued, his volume just loud enough to ensure everyone heard. "I need you to open your bag." Jamal shifted uncomfortably near the entrance, his hand tightening into a fist. He recognized her now. He had seen her in a magazine, her face next to the words "Luxury's Rising Star." But Todd hadn't. And Jamal was too low on the ladder to intervene. Naomi inhaled slowly. This wasn't new. She had been accused of being in the wrong store at 18. Had been asked if she could afford it at 22. Had been followed like a shadow in designer boutiques even after making her first million. But this was her store. Her brand. And he didn't know. "Do you know who I am?" Her voice was calm, but steel lurked beneath. Todd chuckled, dismissive. "Another customer trying to play innocent," he said, his hand gesturing to Jamal. "Sir, escort her to the back." Naomi's jaw tightened as Jamal stepped forward hesitantly. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw the apology in them. But there was also fear. He was trapped too. She allowed them to lead her toward the back room, the gazes of shoppers burning into her skin. Humiliation clawed at her chest, but she kept her head high. Todd leaned against the counter, satisfied. He had handled it. Maintained order. Protected the brand. He had no idea that he had just set fire to his own career. Naomi sat in the small, sterile back room, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows. She pulled out her phone, fingers steady. One call. That's all it would take. She dialed Catherine Hollingsworth, the board member whose investment had helped launch Elan Noir into global markets. When Catherine picked up, Naomi's voice was cool, but her words cut like glass. Get to the flagship store. Now. Outside the room, Todd joked with a sales associate. Caught another one, he said, smug. He was still laughing when his phone buzzed, an urgent message from corporate. His smile faltered. He had no idea the ground beneath him was beginning to crack. Todd Walker's confidence was unshakable as he leaned against the marble counter, his arms folded smugly across his chest. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Elan Noir flagship store, highlighting the gleam of luxury handbags and designer shoes. To him, the brief disruption with the black woman had been routine, an unspoken part of the job. He prided himself on keeping the store secure. He didn't realize he had just set a fire beneath his own feet. Behind the closed door of the small, sterile back room, Naomi Blackwell sat with her legs crossed and her phone resting lightly in her hand. Her heart was steady, but the fire in her chest had not dimmed. She had learned long ago that power was not in the volume of her voice, but in the weight of her connections. Her message to Catherine Hollingsworth had been brief but precise.
If you're enjoying this video, I would truly appreciate it if you could give it a like. It means so much and helps a lot more than you know. While you're there, please click that subscribe button. It's completely free, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss any of my new videos. Your support honestly keeps me going, and I can't thank you enough.
Was steady, but the fire in her chest had not dimmed. She had learned long ago that power was not in the volume of her voice, but in the weight of her connections. Her message to Catherine Hollingsworth had been brief but precise: flagship store. Immediate situation. Manager profiling me. Handle it. Catherine's reply came in under 2 minutes. On my way. Naomi leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting to the security camera mounted in the corner of the room. She wondered if Todd was watching, reveling in his imagined victory. Her jaw tightened. He didn't know. Not yet. But he would soon understand that the woman he humiliated owned every inch of this store, from the Italian tiles to the scent wafting through the air. Jamal Rivers hovered outside the back room, anxiety gnawing at his stomach. He had heard snippets of Naomi's phone call, enough to know this was no ordinary customer. He glanced over at Todd, who was laughing with the other employees, basking in his supposed triumph. Jamal wiped his palms against his slacks. He didn't know what was coming, but he sensed it would be big. 30 minutes later, the sleek, black town car pulled up outside the flagship store. Catherine Hollingsworth stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her platinum blonde bob was impeccable, and her tailored suit exuded wealth and power. She didn't pause to admire the window displays, she strode through the entrance with the kind of presence that silenced conversations. Todd's smirk faltered when he saw her. Catherine's visits were rare and always signaled something significant. He straightened his tie, trying to mask his surprise. Miss Hollingsworth, he greeted, forcing a smile. What brings you here? Catherine's eyes were cold. Where is she? Todd blinked. Who? Naomi Blackwell. The name hit like a thunderclap. Todd's face drained of color. He knew the name, everyone in the company did. Naomi Blackwell, the visionary founder and CEO of Elan Noir, a trailblazer in the fashion industry. The woman whose designs had redefined luxury and whose face had graced the cover of Forbes. Todd stammered. She's in the back. There was a misunderstanding. Catherine's gaze sliced through him like a blade. Take me to her. Now. Todd led her to the back room, his palms slick with sweat. Every step felt like a countdown to his execution. When he opened the door, Naomi was already standing, her arms crossed. Their eyes met, hers fierce and unyielding, his filled with dawning horror. Naomi, Catherine greeted, her voice softening. I'm so sorry this happened. Naomi offered a tight nod but kept her eyes locked on Todd. He fumbled for words, his earlier arrogance dissolving into panic. I didn't know. That's the problem, Naomi cut in, her tone like steel. You didn't know. You assumed. Because I didn't look like what you expect from a customer in this store. Or maybe you thought someone like me couldn't possibly own the brand. Todd's mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Naomi stepped closer, her voice low but charged with authority. You humiliated me. You weaponized my skin against me. In my own store. Jamal watched from the hallway, his chest tight. He felt vindicated, but also ashamed that he had played a part in it. He wanted to speak up, to apologize, but the weight of his complicity held him still. Catherine turned to Todd, her tone clipped and final. Your employment is terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Todd's face crumpled. Please, Pi. There's nothing to discuss, Naomi interjected. We built this brand on dignity, on challenging outdated narratives. You compromised that. You compromised me. The room was silent except for Todd's shallow breathing. Security arrived within minutes. Todd was led through the store he once ruled, his colleagues watching with wide eyes. Customers whispered, phones discreetly recording. The man who had wielded his power so freely was now stripped of it, his pride unraveling with every step. Naomi stepped out shortly after, standing tall beside Catherine. Jamal approached cautiously. Ms. Blackwell, I'm sorry. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop it. Naomi studied him, recognizing the conflict in his eyes. Next time, you will. He nodded, relief mixing with regret. As Naomi left the store, heads turned, not in suspicion, but in recognition. Power had shifted. The woman they had underestimated had claimed her throne. And those who had doubted her now knew the cost of their ignorance. The tension inside the Elan Noir flagship store lingered long after Todd Walker had been escorted out. His absence left a hollow space, like the aftermath of a storm that had uprooted the ground but spared the walls. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, their once confident chatter now reduced to whispers. Each one questioned their role. How many times had they watched Todd profile customers? How often had they turned away, complicit in their silence? Naomi Blackwell stood near the window display, her reflection merging with the mannequins draped in her latest collection. Her arms were folded, her face impassive, but inside, a fire still burned. She wasn't angry simply because of what Todd had done, she was angry because this was not new. She had built Elan Noir from the ground up, a brand celebrated for breaking barriers in an industry steeped in exclusion, yet here she was, accused like any other black woman walking into a luxury store. Catherine Hollingsworth, ever the composed businesswoman, approached her with careful steps. We've sent a company-wide memo about today's incident, she began. Sensitivity training is being reinforced, and we're reviewing our hiring practices. Naomi nodded, but her jaw remained tight. That's a start, she said. But I want more than memos and training modules. I want systemic change. I want our employees to understand that this brand is not just about profit, it's about representation. We don't tolerate bias here. Catherine hesitated, then sighed. I understand, Naomi. But you know the resistance we face. Investors want returns, not lectures. Changing culture, it's a slow process. Naomi turned sharply. Catherine, I built this brand because the luxury world never saw women like me as worthy. I will not let it become a place that degrades the very people we claim to uplift. If the investors can't align with that, they can take their money elsewhere. Catherine raised her hands in surrender. All right. You lead, I'll back you. As the conversation concluded, Jamal Rivers lingered a few feet away, clutching a clipboard like a lifeline. His heart pounded. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind since Naomi's confrontation with Todd, but facing her now, after witnessing her power, felt different. Ms. Blackwell? His voice cracked slightly. She turned to him, her expression softening. Yes? I just wanted to apologize again, he said, his eyes darting downward. I should have spoken up. I knew what Todd was doing was wrong, but I was scared. I need this job. Naomi studied him. He was young, maybe 23, 24. The same age she had been when she was laughed out of her first pitch meeting by white executives who said her designs were too bold for the refined market. I understand fear, she said gently. But fear can't be your excuse forever. If you see injustice and stay silent, you become part of it. Jamal nodded, shame settling in his chest. I want to be better. Good, Naomi said. Because I'm not firing you. His eyes widened. You're not? No. You have potential, Jamal. But you need to earn your place here. Starting today, you'll be transferred to our internal culture division. You'll work with our diversity team. Help fix what's broken. Jamal's breath caught. He had expected the worst, a security escort like Todd. Instead, he had been offered a second chance. Thank you, he whispered. Naomi's phone buzzed, a message from her assistant reminding her of a meeting with investors later that afternoon. She sighed. The fight for dignity never paused. She glanced around the store. Customers were returning to their browsing, though a few still whispered about what had transpired. She noticed a young black woman examining a clutch, her fingers grazing the fabric with the same reverence Naomi had once held for her first designer piece. Naomi approached her, offering a warm smile. It's beautiful, isn't it? The woman's eyes lit up. Yes. I love this brand. It's so empowering. Naomi nodded, the weight in her chest lifting slightly. That's what it's meant to be. As she stepped back, Naomi realized this was the real victory. Her presence, her success, despite every barrier, was reshaping perceptions. She had been humiliated today, but she had also reclaimed her power. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone that Elan Noir was not just a brand, it was a revolution. As Naomi exited the store, her head held high, she knew the battle was far from over. But for now, she had won this round. And that was enough to keep fighting. The air outside the Elan Noir flagship store felt different as Naomi Blackwell stepped onto the bustling street. The tension from earlier still clung to her, but beneath it was a fierce resolve, a determination that had carried her from the cramped apartment where she first sketched designs to the marble floors of this empire she had built. Today was a battle scar, but she would wear it with pride. As her town car pulled up, Naomi's driver, Kelvin, opened the door with his usual professionalism, but his eyes betrayed concern. He had heard murmurs through the grapevine. News of the incident had already begun circulating, spreading like wildfire across the fashion industry's whisper network. Naomi's name was on every tongue, but not in the way she preferred. Rough day, hmm? Kelvin asked cautiously. Naomi gave a tight smile. Just another day being underestimated. As the car slipped into traffic, her phone vibrated relentlessly with messages, industry insiders, fellow designers, media inquiries. She ignored most, except one from her closest confidant, Sarah Mensah, who co-founded Elan Noir alongside her before stepping back into a more advisory role. Sarah heard what happened. "Need me to fly in?" "Naomi, not yet. But we need to talk. This is bigger than today." Sarah's response was immediate. Sarah, always ready. Naomi leaned her head against the cool leather seat and closed her eyes. She could still see Todd's smug face morphing into shock as he learned who she was. That look, disbelief, embarrassment, fear, was familiar. She had seen it on the faces of venture capitalists who doubted her vision, on buyers who claimed black luxury was a contradiction, on journalists who called her a rising star even after 10 years at the top. But today's humiliation had cut deeper because it had happened within her walls, inside the kingdom she had built to defy those very prejudices. And it exposed a truth she could no longer ignore: her success hadn't insulated her. Not from racism. Not from assumptions about who belonged in luxury spaces. Not even in a store with her name attached to it. By the time she arrived at Elan Noir's headquarters, a sleek glass building symbolizing everything she had fought for, Naomi's resolve had crystallized into action. She bypassed her office and headed straight for the executive conference room, calling an emergency meeting with her senior leadership team. The room filled quickly. Catherine Hollingsworth was there, of course, alongside department heads for marketing, operations, and retail management. They were predominantly white, a fact Naomi had noticed but tolerated until now. Jamal Rivers had been invited as well, a deliberate choice. His presence was a reminder of who had been harmed and who had stayed silent. Naomi stood at the head of the table, her tone measured but firm. Today's incident at our flagship store was not an isolated mistake. It was a symptom of a larger issue, an issue we cannot afford to ignore. She paused, letting her words sink in. Elan Noir was built to challenge the fashion industry's exclusionary practices. We are not just selling products, we are selling representation, dignity, and power. What happened today betrayed that mission. Catherine nodded in agreement, but some others shifted uncomfortably. Retail director Greg Maxwell, a middle-aged white man who had been with the company since its expansion, cleared his throat. "Naomi, we all agree what happened was unacceptable. But we've already dismissed Todd. We're implementing bias training." "That's not enough," Naomi cut in, her eyes sharp. "This is not about one man's prejudice. It's about a culture we've allowed to fester. Our staff is not reflective of our customers. Our leadership is not reflective of the communities we claim to serve. That ends now." The room was silent. Naomi pressed on. "We will overhaul our hiring practices. We will prioritize diversity, not as a checkbox, but as a requirement. Every level, from the sales floor to the boardroom, will reflect the values we built this brand on." Greg hesitated. "This could alienate some of our existing partners." Naomi's gaze was unflinching. "Then they can leave. This is not a negotiation." Jamal sat upright, absorbing every word. He saw in Naomi what he had hoped existed in every leader but rarely found: courage. She was not simply reacting to injustice, she was dismantling it. As the meeting concluded, Naomi's message was clear. Elan Noir would not merely recover from this scandal, it would transform. The brand would no longer just sell high-end handbags and couture, it would embody the future of inclusivity in luxury. Later that evening, as Naomi sat alone in her office, she scrolled through social media. The story had broken wide open. Some praised her swift action, others criticized her for exposing racism within her own company. But one comment stood out, a young woman's tweet that read, "I saw myself in Naomi Blackwell today." They tried to diminish her, but she reminded them who she is. We belong in luxury. We always have. Naomi smiled, the weight on her chest lifting ever so slightly. This was why she fought. Not for approval. Not for profit. But for that young woman, and every other person who needed to see that power could look like them. Tomorrow, there would be more battles. But tonight, Naomi knew she had already won the war that mattered most, the war for her dignity. Naomi Blackwell arrived at the Elan Noir flagship store earlier than usual, before the morning rush of well-dressed customers and staff clocking in. The atmosphere was different now, subtly, but unmistakably. There was a stiffness to the smiles, a nervous energy in the way the employees greeted her. She knew the event of the past few days still loomed over everyone. The ghost of Todd Walker's accusation lingered like an unpleasant scent, impossible to wash away with polite apologies or corporate statements. She walked past the pristine display of handbags, each carefully curated piece a reminder of her journey from sketching designs on her bedroom floor to dominating the shelves of luxury boutiques. Every stitch represented defiance, proof that she, a black woman, could not only enter this world but reshape it. Yet, for all her success, a single moment had reminded her that she was still seen as an outsider by those who guarded the gates. As she made her way toward the back offices, she noticed Jamal Rivers adjusting a shelf near the shoe section. His posture was more confident, but his eyes still carried traces of guilt. She offered him a brief nod, and he straightened up, his shoulders squaring with newfound purpose. He had been assigned to work alongside the diversity and culture team, and word had already spread that he was taking his role seriously. Naomi had made sure his second chance was not just symbolic, it was real. The conference room was already occupied when she stepped inside. Catherine Hollingsworth sat at the head of the table, flanked by two unfamiliar faces, representatives from the investment firm backing Elan Noir's upcoming international expansion. Greg Maxwell was also present, though his expression seemed tighter than usual. Naomi felt the weight of the meeting before a single word was spoken. "We wanted to meet in person to discuss the situation," began a suited man with graying temples, introducing himself as Richard Evans, senior partner at Caldwell Investments. "The media coverage around the incident involving your manager has raised concerns." Naomi leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. She knew this tone well, it was the voice of people who valued stability over justice, profit over progress. Richard continued, "Our investors appreciate the brand's commitment to diversity, but there's worry that the aggressive changes you're implementing could alienate certain, established clientele." There it was, the coded language she had battled her entire career. Established clientele. A euphemism for wealthy, predominantly white customers who viewed diversity as a threat rather than an enrichment. Naomi's voice was steady but cold. "Are you suggesting that holding my employees accountable for racism is bad for business?" Richard shifted slightly. "We're suggesting that discretion is vital. Too much upheaval could disrupt the brand's image." Greg Maxwell, who had always aligned himself with whoever held power in the room, chimed in carefully. "We all want what's best for Elan Noir. Perhaps we can balance progress with stability." Naomi felt the familiar heat rising in her chest. She had built this empire, brick by brick, only to be told, again, that her dignity was negotiable. That her identity was a marketing tool to be wielded, but never too loudly. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Richard's. "Let me be clear. Elan Noir's image is built on inclusion and empowerment. If our investors are uncomfortable with that, they can find another brand to exploit." A tense silence followed. Catherine shifted in her seat but offered no interruption, she knew Naomi's temper was earned. Richard forced a smile, though his jaw was tight. "We understand your position, Ms. Blackwell. We'll relay your message to the board." The meeting adjourned with stiff handshakes and feigned pleasantries, but Naomi knew she had drawn a line in the sand. She was prepared for the fallout. She had weathered worse. Later that afternoon, as she reviewed new designs in her private office, an email notification flashed across her screen. The subject line read, "Urgent, internal memo leak." Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Attached was a copy of a memo allegedly circulated within Caldwell Investments. Its contents made her stomach twist. Following recent tensions with Elan Noir's leadership, we recommend evaluating alternative partnerships. The current CEO's focus on racial advocacy poses a long-term risk to brand stability and luxury market appeal. Naomi's hands trembled, not with fear but with rage. This was not concern, this was a threat. A warning that her insistence on dignity could cost her everything she had built. She closed her laptop slowly, exhaling through her nose. This was the moment they had been waiting for, or a crack in her armor, an opportunity to reclaim what they believed a black woman should never possess. They wanted her to retreat, to smooth things over, to remember her place. But they had miscalculated. Naomi Blackwell had never known her place, because she had spent her entire life carving it out of stone with her bare hands. And if they thought she would surrender now, they had gravely underestimated her. Naomi Blackwell's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she entered the Elan Noir corporate headquarters the following morning. Her stride was purposeful, but her mind was racing. The leaked memo from Caldwell Investments had ignited a firestorm within her. The subtext was clear: they saw her push for accountability as a disruption, a risk to their pristine bottom line. To them, her power was conditional. Her position at the helm of Elan Noir was accepted only so long as she didn't make them uncomfortable. The moment she demanded more than token diversity, the whispers of replacement had begun. She had seen it before: how quickly a black woman's authority could be questioned, her competence reduced to luck, her success deemed fragile. But Naomi had not built Elan Noir on borrowed power. She had bled for this brand. And now, she was prepared to burn bridges if it meant preserving the integrity she had infused into every stitch and fabric. As she approached the glass-walled conference room, she caught a glimpse of Todd Walker seated inside. His posture was different, deflated, cautious. He had returned to work pending the internal review, but the air around him was heavy with discomfort. The once arrogant man who had accused her of theft now avoided eye contact whenever their paths crossed. Naomi felt no satisfaction in his discomfort. His shame was his own burden to bear, but her focus was beyond him now. She entered the room, where the senior executive team was gathered. Catherine Hollingsworth offered a tight smile, while Greg Maxwell's usual neutrality seemed tinged with nervousness. The atmosphere was tense, news of the memo had spread like wildfire. The Caldwell partnership was crucial to the brand's expansion into European markets. Investors were jittery. Naomi knew many in the room feared she would escalate the situation, risking millions. She began without preamble. "I'm sure you've all seen the memo." There was an uncomfortable shuffle around the table. Greg cleared his throat. "We're working to confirm its authenticity. But we need to consider our next steps carefully." Naomi's gaze was steely. "Our next step is to remind Caldwell Investments who they're dealing with." Catherine leaned forward, concern etched into her features. "Naomi, we understand your anger, but this partnership..." "This partnership," Naomi interrupted, "was built on mutual respect. If Caldwell believes they can undermine me because I demand racial accountability, they are mistaken." A younger executive, Amanda Lee, shifted nervously. "But if we push back too hard, we risk losing the European rollout. That could damage the brand." Naomi's voice hardened. "The brand is not just handbags and heels. The brand is our message. We empower the overlooked, the underestimated. If we compromise on that, we become just another label catering to the privileged few." Silence hung in the room. Naomi could see the fear in some of their eyes, the fear of losing status, of disrupting the carefully curated image of luxury. But she also saw something else in a few faces: admiration, respect. Jamal Rivers, who had been invited to observe the meeting as part of his development role, sat near the back. His eyes shone with pride. Greg spoke carefully. So, what exactly are you proposing? Naomi's lips curled into a faint smile, the kind that signaled she had already made up her mind. We go public. Not just about the memo, but about what Elan Noir stands for. We launch a campaign celebrating our commitment to diversity, featuring the faces behind the brand, our designers, our artisans, our store staff. We make it clear that this company's success is built on people from every background. And we make it known that any partner who cannot align with that vision is free to walk. The boldness of the proposal caused a ripple of murmurs. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, but Naomi could see the wheels turning. This was not just a defense, it was an offensive move. It would frame Elan Noir as a trailblazer, forcing other brands to respond. It was risky, but it was powerful. Greg's resistance softened, though his tone remained cautious. That could work, but it will draw attention. And Caldwell may retaliate. Naomi's voice was calm but resolute. Let them. They need us more than we need them. The meeting concluded with tentative agreement. Plans were set in motion. PR teams were mobilized. Designers were briefed. But for Naomi, the most important moment came as she was leaving. Jamal Rivers approached her, his voice quiet but firm. Ms. Blackwell, thank you. For not backing down. She looked at him, seeing not just an employee, but a young black man who needed to know that his future didn't have to be built on silence and compromise. I'm not fighting just for me, she said. I'm fighting for all of us. That night, Naomi sat in her office, staring out over the city skyline. She knew the battle ahead would be fierce. Caldwell would not surrender easily. There would be threats, whispers of boycotts, perhaps even subtle sabotage. But she was ready. Because this was more than a business. This was her legacy. And no one, no investor, no manager, no racist assumption, would ever strip her of what she had built. Todd Walker's resignation email landed in Naomi Blackwell's inbox at exactly 7:42 a.m. It was brief, almost clinical. He cited personal reasons for his departure, thanked the company for the opportunity, and expressed hope that his exit would contribute to the healthier work environment. There was no mention of their last conversation, nor the incident on the sales floor that had ignited it all. Naomi read it twice, then closed her laptop. She felt neither triumph nor pity, just a quiet sense of closure. The man had been his own undoing. The Elan Noir flagship store reopened that same morning under new management. Jamal Rivers, the once overlooked assistant manager, stood at the helm. His promotion had been swift but earned. Naomi had seen his potential long before Todd's implosion. She had merely accelerated what was inevitable. Now, he stood in the same store where he had once been dismissed as background, his crisp suit and confident stance sending a message to every employee and customer who entered. The future looked different. Naomi made an unannounced visit that afternoon. As she stepped into the boutique, the atmosphere was transformed. The tension that had once hung in the air like humidity was gone. Staff moved with ease, their smiles genuine. Shoppers, diverse in age, race, and background, browsed freely. The security guard, a black woman named Delores, greeted Naomi with warmth, recognizing her immediately but with no trace of the paranoia that had once been standard protocol. Jamal approached, his face lighting up. Ms. Blackwell, it's an honor to see you here. You're doing good work, Naomi said, her eyes scanning the bustling store. I can feel it. We're trying, he said. People needed to see that change was real. Naomi nodded. She lingered near the display table that had once been the scene of her humiliation. The handbags were still there, sleek, elegant, but they now represented something more. A symbol not just of wealth, but of resilience. She picked one up, tracing the embossed Elan Noir logo with her fingers. This had always been more than leather and stitching. It was proof that she belonged. that others like her belonged. Later that evening, Naomi attended a press event announcing Elan Noir's upcoming We Built This campaign. The room was packed with media, influencers, and industry insiders. The backdrop featured photographs of the artisans behind the brand, hand sewing, faces smiling, people from Lagos to Los Angeles. Jamal stood alongside a seamstress named Maria, and Delores from security. They weren't props. They were the brand. Naomi took the stage. She spoke with the clarity of a woman who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. She addressed the incident at the store not as a scandal, but as a catalyst, a reminder that progress required vigilance. She acknowledged the systemic issues black shoppers faced, the prejudices lurking behind polished counters. But she didn't end with condemnation. She ended with power. "We are not guests in this industry. We are architects of it," she said. "We are not tokens in someone else's success story. We write our own." The applause was thunderous. As the cameras flashed, Naomi noticed a familiar face in the back, Catherine Hollingsworth, her longtime ally in the corporate trenches. Catherine gave a subtle nod, one professional woman to another. There would always be battles, against investors like Caldwell, against bias that mutated but never fully disappeared. But tonight, they had won. Naomi slipped out of the venue onto the cool city street. She breathed in deeply. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages, but she ignored them for a moment. She looked up at the skyline, feeling not just victorious, but rooted. She thought back to that day in the store when Todd had looked at her and seen nothing but a black woman who didn't belong. He hadn't known that she was the foundation under his feet. He hadn't known that the world was shifting and people like him were standing on borrowed ground. Naomi smiled to herself. Let them underestimate her. It only made the victory sweeter.